All right, well, we have 8 of us here, I think, and maybe we should talk about the lecture, plunge into it a little bit. And I'm going to let people in as we go. Yeah. So why is it that most of the people in the Pathwork are women? I don't know. Is it my fault? Is it my creation? And did I create this? I don't know. Anyway, this is an early lecture. Lecture 48, 1959. But you know, I think that I see all the current themes, the themes resonate through the lectures from the first to the last without change, I think. Don't you think so, Tracy? I mean, this lecture, it just seems to me is a lot about unity and duality.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I was making a list of the main themes of the Pathwork.
Yeah.
My list is seven items, and they are in all 7 items are in every single lecture.
And the unity and duality is such an important theme later on in the lectures. But in this one, I mean, this seems to be a main focus. That seems to be a main focus of this lecture. I mean, like, for example, look at the description of the life force in the second paragraph. The life force contains all divine attributes. It is. It has not come into existence. It does not do. It does not work or have. It simply is. Now that is the unitive state, where there's no tension, there's no demand, there's no opposition. It simply is. It sounds like the Tao, right? If you read, the Tao Te Ching. A human being living in complete and utter harmony with the life force would not die, yet would not remain in the physical body either. This kind of reminds me, not to digress too much, but an episode of The Outer Limits where a scientist determines how to increase the evolution and has a machine that stimulates evolution in a subject, in a man. And he goes through several stages, becoming more and more intelligent, more and more capable. And finally, he says, I want to make the transition to a being of pure energy. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. A human being living in complete and utter harmony with the life force would not die, yet would not remain in the physical body either. And I think that that reflects what the guide often says, which is consciousness creates form, not the other way around. Our essence, our spiritual essence, our energy created the form, our bodies. So another aspect of duality or unity is the fear that the ego has of not having done the right thing or punishment. I mean, when you read the sentence, you all know from the teachings you have received so far that you violate spiritual law constantly. On page 2, the obstructions within your soul exist only because you have violated divine law in some way. Now, to my mind, that seems pretty harsh. And I mean, immediately start thinking, well, what have I done? How have I violated spiritual law? What am I guilty of having done? But when you look at it from the point of view of the unitive consciousness, the violation of spiritual law, I believe, it seems to me, simply has to do with duality, with being in the state of duality itself, which is something that we can't help. I mean, to some degree, we can help it because we can make choices, but to another degree, that's where we are. And then, of course, the task of us here on the Pathwork is to be open to the life force and to walk the path of self-finding, which the guide says is a gradual, slow way, and there is no faster way, to dissolve all the walls, rocks, and petrifications within yourself, and so to allow the life force to work in you. I think this is a frequent metaphor in the lectures, you know, and it's also interesting because it's the same thing in core energetics. You know, that there are petrified parts of the personality, frozen blocks that we have within that we have to dissolve. That is the images. That's what the images are. They are frozen aspects of the self where the energy is not flowing freely. And, you know, as I remember back in the early days with John Parakas, who founded Core Energetics, how he would enjoin us to kind of let the energy flow through our bodies and do exercises and let out the voice and stand in a certain way and just experience energy in our body, because that was a way to get through the emotional blocks. So it's really similar to what the guide says here about the walls, rocks, and petrifications within. So that is what we try to do. We try to make recognitions and dissolve these walls and these blocks. And when you do that, as we know, quote unquote, you experience a feeling of peace, strength, a sense of being vibrantly alive until the next obstruction is tackled. That's page 1. So then on pages 2 and 4, the guide talks about a medical metaphor, which is pretty straightforward, right? In other words, if we deny the fact that we feel sick and we don't get treatment, you know, we'll die, obviously, and on the earth plane. And in other words, you can't forestall, but this is spiritual medicine, right? And it's our tasks to confront those things within us that are sick, where we feel obstructions, the images, and then we can make progress. And the guide talks about later on the metaphor of surgery. That's on page 3. 2 kinds of pain, the degenerating and regenerating. There's the kind of pain of becoming sick, feeling the symptoms of an onsetting illness. One is then on the downward curve. And then there's a different kind of pain, often even more acute, that goes with the healing process, the regenerating pain. This is often, indeed always, necessary before complete cure or healing can take place. So, you know, the guide says that you have to go through these. The path of self-facing is about facing the pain and not shying away from it. And the guide very often also says that, you know, the fear that we have of anticipating pain is worse than the pain itself. So you're afraid to move because you're afraid of the pain of motion, but it's a lot more painful to stay immobile and to not tackle whatever that is that's preventing the emotions from flowing and preventing the obstructions from dissolving. Then the guide talks about images, which of course is a follow through on other lectures that were given a little bit earlier before this. And then the guide recommends an exercise where we take the point of view of somebody who we're having a disagreement with and try to become an advocate for that person, like an attorney for that person. And in that way, to kind of unify with that person, to understand what that person is experiencing. You know, this reminded me of my arguments with anti-vaxxers, you know, and it's not about the facts, you know, because if you try to dispute facts with somebody who has a diametrically opposed opinion to you, you can never, in my experience anyway, it's kind of a hopeless endeavor to try to dispute facts, because then you can always come up with other facts. and possibilities, other things that haven't been explored. And the way to become the advocate for another person is to understand, I think, emotionally and spiritually what their position means. And I think just about in every case, one can identify with another person's feelings about something. So I was just thinking about what the guide says there on page 5 before the questions. Try to act on your adversary's behalf as though you actually were a lawyer and your reputation were at stake. Play a game. Imagine your life depends on presenting a convincing case for the other person. The better you represent him, the better it is for you. And not, as you may continue to believe, the better you defend him, the worse you come out. After the other has heard you first as your client, he will give you additional material so that you can succeed better. Listen to it so as to extend and strengthen the case for your client. Do you know what this will do for you? It will open new vistas of understanding. You are so used to representing only your case. There you are perfect. There you do not need further improvement and practice. Learn now to see the other side. Be the lawyer for the other one instead of for yourself. This is my advice. So as a lawyer yourself, Tracy, what do you think?
I just had to hit the unmute button. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because that's one of the main things we have to learn to do in law school, is to argue both sides of the case. And I think that that's also very good training of your mind to realize that you can do that. You can take the other side's case and make a strong argument. And when you do that, you actually start to believe that side. So it's a very interesting exercise, and one of the more advantageous things you learn by going to law school. And it does have, like you said, it does in some way create a unitive state, because you're able to see both sides of an issue, whatever that issue might be, which puts you into a sort of a whole picture of it, as opposed to just looking at it from one end of the telescope.
Right.
I feel blessed that I feel actually blessed. That was a big thing we had to do in law school, and I think that was one of the biggest blessings of law school.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another approach to the unitive state. Because if you somehow empathize with another person's point of view, you meet them in a common ground.
Right. And it's the saying, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. We have a lot of little pieces of advice that are saying the same thing. But when you actually do the exercise, because we normally don't do it. I don't do that. I did many years ago when I had to do it for school, but I know how to do it because I was taught how to, so, but it's funny you should mention the anti-vaxxers, because I've been trying to understand that myself, they're how they feel the way they do. Even with all the people still dying, there are a lot of people who still don't want to be vaccinated. And yeah. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, like you have, obviously, Alan.
Well, everybody wants freedom, right?
Right.
But I think that freedom can only come from the path of self-facing, personally. I mean, isn't that the spiritual awareness, that freedom comes from your own spiritual self-search and your commitment to your own truth? Yeah. But I mean, it's not difficult to understand emotionally where these folks are coming from. They want freedom.
Hold on one second. Joel wants to say something. I'm just going to let him have the seat for a minute.
So when I was thinking about the life force, right, and how life force is in everything, and the life force being the energy of the infinite, right, the creator, and so it's in all of us. And what tends to happen, particularly in politics, we tend to take sides. And for example, when all that was going on with the insurrection, it's been very upsetting for me. And so I just tried to understand as best I could, without doing a lot of study on it, what their point of view might be, even though it's diametrically opposed to my own, and to recognize the fact that they too are human beings like myself. And so therefore the God energy is in them as well. And that they are trying to express the truth as they see it. And so as I'm able to, the more I'm able to recognize that somebody who I might call my enemy is actually a manifestation of God as well. And that the more that I can recognize that and try to empathize, or at least recognize where they're coming from, it helps to reduce the antipathy and fear that I have.
Yeah, well, I think that's what the guide is saying, that one has to take their point of view and argue it. But I feel like I don't want to get into the trap of facts, alleged facts, because then you kind of go down a rabbit hole.
Yes. Facts are very subjective.
All right. Anyway, I wanted to mention on page 3, the guide, in every lecture, there's the promise the guide puts forward. And in this lecture, of course, it's the same. Whoever approaches the stony and steep road of self-finding will experience gradually, little by little, changes that are unbelievable or would be unbelievable for anyone who does not invest in this. Does everybody agree with that? I mean, have people found that to be so personally? Any thoughts?
Could you read that again?
Marcella, whoever approaches the stony and steep road of self-finding will experience gradually, little by little, changes that are unbelievable or would be unbelievable, but for anyone who does not invest in this. Marcella, were you going to say something?
I would ask, what paragraph is it?
That is paragraph on page 3, the middle of the last paragraph.
Okay. Thank you.
I do not promise you miracles, my friends. Miracles in that sense do not exist. Whoever wants to believe in that kind of salvation does so because it does not entail personal effort. Wouldn't that be easy? But no, such salvation does not exist. This path is one of utter reality. There are no fairy tales. And on the next page, the guide there's another paragraph where the guide puts forward some kind of strong language about the pathwork and about the way to understand this path of self-development. Let's see. So, my dear friends, let the life force into your soul. You cannot do so by simply willing it, by trying to get into a holy mood, though this may help a little. A prayer will give you the necessary strength to do your part, but the work has to be done. So, in other words, the guide always says that the path requires the utmost amount of effort. But the work has to be done, that of the living flow, which you at one time or another have destroyed. That's the fall, right? The fall of the angels. That we destroyed something that was living and growing within us by our choices. The living flow, which you at one time or another have destroyed, has to be regenerated by your own efforts in facing yourself, in overcoming your resistance and sluggishness and self-pity. You should never believe, even for an instant, that what you experience is unjust and unfair, no matter how much it may appear that way. In the last analysis, in absolute truth and reality, you have caused it. Now that's sort of tough medicine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and it's really diametrically opposed to the kind of complaining culture that we have in our country and in so many places. Everyone's blaming people, other people for causing their own suffering or misery or gas prices or whatever it is. But you know, this whole, what the guide says, it's such a radical point of view, but actually I think when you think about it, it's really similar to many religious points of view, to Christianity itself. But in other words, we shouldn't commiserate with other people in our blaming circumstances or even other people. But we have to take responsibility. So I know I just did a press conference about homeless people in the subway. And, you know, it would appear to be very cruel to go to the homeless people and say, you know what, you caused this, you guys. You're lying there in your own filth. You're getting on the one train and you're riding to one end, Van Cortlandt Park, you're riding all the way down South Ferry and you're riding all the way back and you caused it. But you know, even though that may be true, it's still up to us to do the utmost we can as human beings to see the divine in these folks and help them, I think. So it seems to me, while you can't take on their task, you have to respond as a person, as a human being. So the
Can I
guy's
just say
words,
something? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. Kate. No, that's what I wanted to say about it. What do you think?
Well, it's just that you certainly can't step into that role of blaming the poor guy in the subway, because you're doing exactly what you're saying is wrong to do. You're saying to this guy, I'm going to blame you and you have to stop blaming others. Well, that's just, you just X'd it out. You just made it void, because it really has to be something that comes from within. So my feeling about accepting that we're responsible for what we do, for sure, is that it's very hard to, when we live in a world like this, which says that if something goes wrong outside of me and I can see it, I can show you with my own eyes that I didn't do that, because the world is not reflecting the truth. The truth has to come from within me. So when I see something going wrong outside, I can just step back. I don't have to participate in it, but I can say, you know, that's not just separate from me. It's not separate. It's a part of me in some way. That's one thing I'm working on right now, and I'll stop talking. I'm talking a lot, but that the environment that I'm in right now in my apartment, and then where I live in Brooklyn and further out, all of that is a part of me. I mean, you can just say I made choices, you know.
Right.
So that's where, yeah, that's how I feel about the guys in the subway. Yeah, I mean, one more thing. They're not me. The guy over there is not me. So I could, you know what I mean? It's just saying that I deny that he really is a part of me. Anyway, that's where I come from.
You know, we've co-created that reality.
Exactly. 100% co-created. You know, I'm not responsible for what he did, but in some way he is part of my environment and he's part of me. Yeah.
Yeah, Kay? I mean, I'm sorry, Marion?
Hi. What came to me is gratitude for this pathwork, as the more I have in what I call my toolbox, how to observe, how to shift out of situations, how to accept situations, how to expand. All of these states of being, of course, are all in the lecture. And so I have my charts of the individualized self sphere, the universal self sphere, and the universal spirit. And so those three spheres, those are from the lectures. So the one is the psychological state where it is about the victim. What happened to me? I have to go there. I have to feel my victimhood. As the observer, as the Pathwork Guide said, this first step of transformation is observation. And it's in this lecture. You have to notice this. You have to see what you're doing in order to change it. You can't will it. And the guide is real specific about that in this lecture. And therefore, if I have anything impeding my higher self, it has to be my lower self. So that's the sphere of universal spirit, higher self, lower self mask. I'm no longer a victim. I may feel like it, but I know I'm not. And I may feel like others have power over me, but they really don't. And so then the universal spirit is, I am that. I am the unitive state. I am God. And so I know I shift in and out of these throughout a day, and I may be in one more than the other, and that may be feeling like the victim. So what we learned from the image lectures, when you dissolve an image, you can't do it alone. So we need help when we, trying to dissolve an image. So those three spheres, it helps me to being grounded in the conceptual, which runs through these lectures of, hey, I'm feeling like a victim here. How do I then shift out of that and open up to the other spheres so that so I can make choices? Because it's not the sphere of choice, the individualized self. That's the sphere of feeling what happened to me. So that's just me. So the more I have in my toolbox to help me, the better. And I'm so grateful for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm not. Thank you. I guess, Kay, I wanted to clarify. I'm not blaming anyone. I wouldn't blame a homeless person. I guess the question is, what can I do? What's my response?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Where am I present? How am I present in that situation? Because whatever their karma is doesn't affect me. Whatever their task is in life is their task, right? But what I can do to alleviate suffering is important. Because I think at some point in the lectures, the guide talks about we have a task to alleviate suffering and reduce pain. Right, Tracy? And that's correct, isn't it? In other words,
Yeah,
is
that's
an
right.
objective of ours, as spiritual sentient beings, to reduce pain and suffering.
Right.
Of course, the guide, I think, in this lecture, says that a lot of the source of pain and suffering is our own resistance. Maybe that's the biggest source of pain and suffering, that we resist what would make us healthy, and that is true suffering. Rather than going through it, dealing with the momentary pain of dealing with it, and then coming out on the other side. Don't you sometimes think about the guy talking about like that you can go for many incarnations by making very little progress. One lifetime after another, where you resist meeting aspects of yourself, and then eventually you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you try to make some progress.
Yes. And anyone who's really in survival mode can't then shift into transformation mode like that. So you're right. We have to help these people have basic needs taken care of. And that's what's missing a lot in our society. In the new age, it will not be like that. So it's how do we get there is the big question, so that everybody has their basic needs taken care of. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Anyone else? Ellen, did you want to say something?
Um, I was gonna, is it okay if I speak? I
Yeah.
was just gonna say, in terms of your scenario, seeing, it's like if we're responsible for our reality, that means we're responsible for our response. So I think I see that where compassion, love and compassion are basic tenets. So first we have to see how we're responding to any, I mean, it's talking about, it's interesting when you're looking at an external situation because we have to be careful how you judge someone else's situation because our response is colors it so much. So I think that's like the first, you know, and any conversation that involves that is, you know, it's interesting and there's so many traps. So I don't know. That was my thought for the moment. I had more.
Yeah. Rita, are you listening? I can't see you.
Yes, I am listening.
Any thoughts? You want to weigh
This
in
is a
now or later?
balancing lecture for me. Yeah, because he doesn't he say somewhere, and I have to say I didn't study it, but he doesn't he say somewhere that if one is in alignment with spiritual law, then there is no death?
I believe that's true. I think that he says that on the first page. He says that, right, death is basically, that's another thing about this lecture that is a theme in many of them, that death is basically an illusion and it doesn't have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's an artifact of our egos and our dualistic state in which we inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
Death is but an illusion. An inanimate object you call dead is only so temporarily. This is an interesting sentence, right? All life in whatever way it manifests must exist eternally, for non-eternal life is no life, and therefore a meaningless contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think that's a very good statement about the unitive state versus the dualistic state, because the unitive state encompasses everything. It doesn't admit of the dualistic state. There is nothing else but the unitive state. So if you consider the dualistic state being an illusion, it's like death. It doesn't really exist. But because of the choices we made and the suffering that we caused, we believe it exists. Do you think that's a fair statement?
yes, if we expand our definition of being of aliveness, because that's this title of this lecture is life force, right? And
Right.
and Thich Nhat Hanh has just passed last month or
Yeah.
early this month, and this is a opportunity. Actually, one of the nuns of the group wrote something really thought-provoking and really beautifully written about his dedicating his life to exactly this time, to being able to understand in a greater context his continuation and all of our continuation.
Can you send that to us if you have it?
I can, sure.
I'd love to send it to everyone.
It was beautifully written. She's a poet too, so she wrote it in just as a heartfelt letter,
Yeah.
but it was so well worded.
Yeah, great teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. Beverly, do you have any thoughts about this lecture or this topic?
Well, I guess one of the things that struck me about this lecture was just how powerful the thoughts are, and that the thoughts that the conscious and unconscious thoughts are interrupting the energy flow. And seems like it's it takes a tremendous amount of effort to kind of reach for those unconscious thoughts.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are ill and don't know why they're ill, that the thoughts are manifesting in the body in a blockage of their energy. But
Yeah.
who knows? Who knows these things, except for people who study this pathwork? So it's just, I just found that striking, that our thoughts are just so, so powerful in ways that we have no conscious control over.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a wonderful point about this lecture, because it's really about health if you think about it. Because, you know, the images are like a sicknesses within us spiritually, like physical ailments. And the medical metaphors that the guide uses in this lecture have to do with kind of, I guess, taking the bull by the horns, getting the surgery, getting the operation, facing what you need to face. So, yeah, I think the medical metaphors that the guide uses are no accident, because it's really about health. And the images are really about ill health, what causes it. I guess the images are a parallel to physical ailments. Do you think that's a good metaphor, Tracy? Do you see it that way?
I do. I do see it that way. Because we have physical manifestations of spiritual consciousness. That's who we are right now. So of course, you know, one way it's going to manifest is in your body, in the form of ill health. That would be almost one of the, I would think, the first ways it might manifest. Because if you've got something inside of you which is separating you from the life force, that's going to cause a disturbance in your whole, not just your organism, but in your entire environment. And the first place I think it would start to manifest that disturbance would be in some form of, you know, ill health. So I know when I get disconnected, which unfortunately still happens a lot, something immediately goes wrong with, something little immediately goes wrong physically.
I guess physical crises or health crises are meant to also allow us to try to, in a deep way, understand and grapple with them from a spiritual point of view.
Right.
See the significance of them, whatever that is.
Right.
Look, everything.
And also, right, gives us time to slow down too, right?
Right.
Gives us permission to slow down and reflect, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was thinking Miriam will be able to speak to this as well, but about the guide's statements that the death, you know, is just an illusion. And in this sphere of consciousness that we're all sharing right now, obviously there is death of the physical form, the temporary physical form, all forms, whether human or even rocks, you know, any form, any physical form manifesting in this plane of consciousness will come and go. But if you study Mirababa, which I know Miriam does, and probably many others on the call as well, he talks about this cycle. And once, you know, we're down here in this sort of, we get stuck down here because this is a very sticky place, and the illusion of separateness and duality is very strong. Whoa, sorry. That was my little dog. So it takes a long time, I think, many, many lifetimes to get out of this incarnatory cycle. But once we do, we're in what is called the subtle spheres. And at that point, there really isn't any death anymore, because there is no physical manifestation the way we know it. So I was just thinking about this the other day, and I was, if you didn't have a body, if you were just, if your consciousness was either in a mental form or a subtle form, there would be no death, because what's dying, or what's having the illusion of dying, is the physical form that we're all in. But if you didn't have that, if your consciousness wasn't in a body, connected to a body, so there would be no, there may be different cycles that you go through, but there would be nothing to die, because what dies is the temporary physical manifestation. And even for somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh, I mean, his consciousness, I'm sure, is every bit exactly the same as it was before his body died. But his body was going to die, because you're not getting away from that in this particular plane of existence. Just like you're not going to get away from gravity. If you're here, you're subject to the laws of this earth and this existence and the different forms that they take. And one of them is this constant movement of form. So all you have to do is, pull a weed out of your garden and go back out the next day, and you're going to see how continuous it is. The forms come and the forms go, and we're forms. So
I
Mhm.
want to say something.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
After.
Yeah, go ahead, Kay.
You just said we're forms. And I don't think, for me, what I study, I study A Course in Miracles. Forms are there. They're not to be denied. I'm not saying that form isn't a part of this world, but I'm not a form. And I don't believe that Thich Nhat Hanh thought he was a form, because I just read, just before he died, we were reading this book together, a couple of people, and he really, really knew that something called interbeing. He really got it on a practical level, not even on this philosophic level, which I love, but he really understood that when you have a form like this mouse, that it's interconnected with everything. It's one. So my form is not me. My reality is interconnected with everyone. So I believe that Thich Nhat Hanh, when he had his stroke or when he physically died, the last breath or whatever we call that he knew, even in matter of fact, I think Jesus was the same way, that he knew. Now, Jesus might have been struggling with it toward the end, but at the end, he knew that he wasn't dying, because he was not the form. That's me again.
Okay.
So that's how death cannot be. What's going to die? If you're not the form, what is it that dies? Not me, not my connection with God. Let's just put it simply.
Well,
right, the
okay.
consciousness doesn't. That's right. The consciousness is forever, and it can take different forms. It can take no form. I mean, I think eventually they'll, through the subtle and mental spheres, there really won't be much form, but the consciousness will still continue.
But whether
So-
it has a relationship to our ego consciousness is another matter. It's different. It must be different from the way we think, the way we perceive the dualistic state that we're in. That doesn't endure, I think.
No, I would think not. When you're not assuming that once we die, we're like, oh, wow, okay, my body's gone, or but here I am.
Yes, exactly.
We would have a very strong sense of not only eternity, but also the strong connection that we all have to everything. And your analogy to the homeless was beautiful, Kay, because at that point, it's energy that's more readily seen as the same. Whereas, when we're in different, like my consciousness right now is connected to this body, and
Right. But there can come a time when we still feel that we're in the world, from what how I understand it, that I can feel that I see this happening, but it's not who is the I that is seeing the world. That's if I is always the difficult part, the word I. But if there can be understanding in my mind of true consciousness, I can be here in the world, but I'm not of it. I'm here, but it's not who I am.
So maybe
But-
it's that the world is a dualistic state, but the I is the unitive state. And if you can
Yeah.
feel the unitive state, then you're not of the world, although you're in it.
Absolutely, absolutely. The word I, though, is a bit confusing. I'm working just on being. There's a being, and it's unity being. So there's being here right now with all of us and everywhere. But it doesn't have to, it's not a part, it doesn't have to be a part of the world.
Mhm.
That's an illusion.
Ellen, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So this is, well, whenever I talk here, because I don't know the Pathwork and I that so well, but this conversation is why out of body, a lot of spiritual paths involve exploring out of body experiences, and also why NDE, near death experiences, are so compelling, because those people are saying to us that they've experienced, that they know so clearly that they have experienced themselves out of the body and experienced themselves as pure consciousness and experienced the light. And but then also energy work, I think, does that too. Different forms of energy work, you start to experience your body is not so solid. I remember having an experience where a friend directed me to do a meditation where I just imagined my body just becoming light. And I've had these experiences where I think what I find difficult is how I mean, I guess people like Eckhart Tolle or Thich Nhat Hanh, they're people who seem to remain in that awakened state. And then those of us who've experienced, this periods of time where you just know so strongly, for certain that that it's an illusion, that that this experience of the body. So, we experience pain, you get wounded, you bleed, you experience pain, you get, something threatens your life, you get terrified, you have an illness, you get, the organism experiences this terror of ending. And yet then you can, the next day you can have an experience where you absolutely know for certain there was nothing to be frightened of. I mean, that's like this play that we're in. It's
Yeah, that's the human condition. I mean, that's that sentence I read, right? Whoever approaches the stony and steep road of self-finding will experience gradually, little by little, changes that are unbelievable or would be unbelievable for anyone who does not invest in this.
Right.
So
So I
when
think,
you-
but what's so weird is how, it's kind of describing that if you do the work, then, amazing things will happen. Well, amazing things will happen, and then really crappy things will happen. I mean, people's paths, take these incredible, shapes, that are so, and so I think I brought this up before, the whole idea of that our beliefs that about choice, the question about choice, that you whatever that sentence is about, that we choose everything, but back to the I, what part of me, like, did my soul choose it? Did it choose it before? Is it choosing it now? It's like, and that question is like, well, we definitely make choices now, and we make, right? So there's all these levels of our consciousness, right? There's the psychological levels of the unconscious, and then there's the soul and the, what we don't remember. I mean, it's
Yeah, very good points. I mean, that's what the Pathwork can hopefully help us muddle through. I mean, the different conflicting parts of ourselves that are choosing different things, the different levels are choosing different places to go and different perceptions.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's drawn me here, you know, as I've had so many different experiences, spiritual paths, and I feel like what's drawn me here is the encompassing of the psychological, because I think that's the weakness that I've discovered in a lot of the, I've had so many interesting experiences. Like, there's actually an organization called the International Academy of Consciousness, and a lot of their focus is on teaching people how to have out-of-body experiences, which I had a little bit of an experience. I'm not someone who's, you know, really, I may have, but that was very, very intriguing. But you know, it didn't really encompass so much. Well, it did a little bit, but it was very much focused on that the scientific, you know, like writing down of the experiences, but to actually apply the psychological to the spiritual, the depth of it is what I
Right,
find so
right.
intriguing about
That's
this.
that's what the pathwork does. That's
Yeah.
that's what this whole work on the images is.
Mhm.
And the guide in this lecture gives a lot of very specific instructions about how to look at your feelings and your assumptions about different parts of yourself, and then to look at what your parents' attitudes were. You know, look at your attitudes toward all the important issues in life. Make a list of all the things that are important in a person's life, such as love, eros, and sex or authority. Think of money, work, various emotions, human relationships, plus a number of other general subjects which you can examine according to what is the person's most pressing problem. Find out what is the attitude of each individual toward that subject. Then begin to question the person about his or her life from this particular point of view, covering childhood, adolescence, young adult life, and so on. Now, that's nothing if not a psychological investigation.
It's very 12 steps, like the fourth step, 12-step work.
Well, you know, I must say that Eva always really liked the 12-step program. Right, Marion? I mean, she would often say that the 12-step is very close to pathwork. She would say that.
Yes, to an extent. There is also process beyond the 12 steps. 12 step is a very good foundation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not staying in it forever. Yes. Yes. And what you were just reading, Alan, is very important. I had underlined it many years ago, going down further, because it's a theme that runs through the lectures without the guide always saying what it is. But it's referring, if you keep going from what you were reading, about incorporating this into the method. That's a tool, and use it whenever the time seems right for this. You know, all that questioning you were saying, Ellen. I know it has been done already in a way, but it should now be a definite program. There
Yeah.
should be no rigid system. You know, you have to work with your intuition and according to the personality. And this is throughout all these lectures is about the reason, will, emotion, personality types. So if you're going to look at yourself and observe, you need to know which is your dominant personality, because is it which defense? Mine is emotion, but I have reason and will also. And without that tool, there's a lot missed in processing in the pathwork. And it's in this lecture, it's woven through all the lectures if one will look at that. So how I look at myself through the eyes of my dominant personality is going to be different than someone whose will is their dominant personality defense, and someone who has reason as their dominant personality sense. And it was in our defense lecture we studied 1 or 2 years ago. It's in there too, about look at things according to your personality. So that filter is absolutely so basic and important in the pathwork process. Know your typology, because it's a distortion of the divine triad nature of love, power, and wisdom.
Yeah, very deep.
So
thank
that's
you.
and I was determined to say something about it because it really means being very, very steeped in that and knowing it backwards and forwards. Yes. And in relationship with other people. I attract those very strong-willed people who want to dominate me because I have the dominant emotion type. They want more of my heart and I want more of their aggression. So, but it can create problems if I'm not really aware of what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Well, Juan, you haven't said anything so far. That's a very fun characteristic of you.
Well, I kind of, sometimes a good thing to just listen and, observe, as Marianne was saying. But there is so much in this lecture. I mean, thank you so much for selecting you and Tracy. I mean, this lecture is so profound the way I see it. It's incredible. And it really brings me personally to the Bible, because I am very much into the Bible, and the Bible is such a great document, such a great book. There is so much in there, and the life force in the universe really, so many way it brings me to, it takes me into the Bible, because well, first I want to comment a little bit on what you, the question that you asked first about these, these feelings that you feel, this experience that you actually experience when you do the work. I mean, I can really, and I don't mean to brag about it, but I really can testify to that, Alan, and all of you brothers and sisters there, because you really do experience that relief when you are able to connect with with your image. I mean, with me, it's like you find one image, and then when you are able to just connect that and really feel and know that it is it, there is so many aspects to it. Then there's guilt and shame and all the other vicious circles that are there involved in this, that have come about, from this wrong conclusion that you enacted, maybe in this incarnation or in childhood, or maybe in other incarnations. But just the same, you experience it here in this lifetime. And so when you are able to go back and really feel and experience and really connect with that image, it's such a great relief. It's such a beautiful feeling of freedom. I mean, that's the way I feel. It's just like enormous feeling of freedom that you feel inwardly, that manifests outwardly. And, I can really testify to that. And then as you go on living your life every day, here and there, little episodes come up of what you have detected to be your image, and how that image is connected to all these other issues and troubles that you have in your life. You are really able to connect them. And so yeah, so just a little comment on that. I mean, I really can identify with what the Pathwork guy says here about these beautiful feelings and experiences that you really begin to feel when you do the work. But as you guys been saying, I mean, it's not easy, because this pain, this discomfort, there's no way around it. I mean, you really have to just sit there with this, whatever it is causes you pain. I mean, we see it in the physical body, really. I mean, what is in the spiritual is also in the physical. I observe myself every time I feel fear and pain, the body automatically shrinks. You want to run away from this pain. It's just like an automatic reaction. It just happens. You just want to run away from what is discomfort, from what doesn't feel well, from what doesn't feel good. So it's an enormous battle, because this is there. These images, all this discomfort, all these things that are hidden in the unconscious, the only way to dig them out, the only way to overcome them, because by digging them out, they will surface, in your interaction with other people, dealing with situations, those for sure, they will come up to the surface. You just have to be, alert enough to observe them when they do come up and not run away from them. Just like focus the laser beam of your awareness on them, and don't really make the effort of not run away, of not shrinking away from what doesn't feel good. And if we are able to do that, one step at a time, slowly, because it's a long process. And I like the phrase that the guy uses in the last page, where he says, "Let none of you be hasty," meaning don't rush with this. Take it easy. If you don't make it in this lifetime, you have many others, to make it happen. But don't run away from it. Don't be rushed into it. Just like focus on it. So that's one point that I wanted to make. The other one that struck me very much, very impacting aspect of this lecture is where the guy says, in the second paragraph of page 1, an inanimate object is petrified life force. And then, of course, on the second paragraph is the one after that, it talks about a human being living in computer, utter harmony, and how death is not necessary. and every other thing. And then there's also page, this is page 5, where the guy again says on the, the answer, question and answer, last answer that he says there, he says the life force is everything that exists, everything good and everything negative or detrimental is petrified life force. In other words, divine truth or divine law that has not been adhered to. So this brings me to the Bible, because pretty much what this is the way I see is like really the life force, the way I understand it anyway. And of course, clarify me if I'm wrong, but this is just my understanding of it. Is really the same Holy Spirit that Jesus talked about in the Bible. Is this life force that really is making everything that exists. I mean, every particle in the universe is made of this spirit matter, I guess we can call it. And so everything is made of that. And the only difference from those things that are solid, like this table, and my awareness, my body, my spirit, is that this energy is petrified. And that's the same, that applies the same thing with death. Death is anything that is not alive, that is not infused with a direct energy. In other words, that pure energy that has not been blocked yet, as the guy says here, which he also in the last page, he says, I mean, there's many others in the Bible calls it sins. In other words, these violations of the spiritual laws, which are also, involved or composed, are part of the life force. And so the same, the Bible talks about the sins, which is pretty much what the guys in the last page and the last paragraph says, where he says bitterness, anger, self-pity block the life force. So in other words, is when all these aspects in us, all these things that we have built up, through incarnations and in this lifetime, of course, these violations of a spiritual law that the Bible calls sins is really what's causing us from not being one with our life force. And, and as the guy says, become that being that really reaches that point where death will cease to exist, because you have moved beyond this realm of impurity and have reached a higher level, which is obviously what Jesus displayed and showed us here, because that is why, and to me, it's very clearly here, why Jesus was able to walk into closed rooms. No need to go through anything. He can break down his body into molecules and atoms and and protons and neutrons and just compose it again and just like sneak in. It's like no need to to do anything else, because you have been able to reach that point in your in your spiritual growth where you no longer have these blockages that in our case, regular humans like us, is prohibiting us from becoming one and the same with that spiritual force. So it's just all beautiful. I mean, it's just really, really great material. So
yeah, I think
thank
you. Those are wonderful insights. I like what the guide also says, that divine law, spiritual law is not about compulsion. It's about reality. He says, law means to you often unconsciously something you are forced or compelled to obey. Law in its real and divine sense has nothing to do with force or compulsion, quite the contrary.
That's right.
As soon as force or compulsion set in, whether from the outside or for within your own self, at that moment, divine law is violated. For divine law is inner freedom.
Yes.
That's what I tell my anti-vaxxer friends who are giving money to the convoy. I say, look, divine law is inner freedom. That is the only freedom. It's not about whether you're going to go and barricade the House of Parliament. It's a little bit of a digression, but Juan, I mean, I love your beautiful perspective about the Bible and the idea that divine law is not a compulsion. Kind of indicates, the way I see that is that the obstructions in ourself, if they can melt, then we follow divine law. It's the images, it's the way that we are locked in duality. That is what prevents us from following divine law. And when we allow the life force to stream through us and we untangle those images, then we follow divine law.
Alan, I
Yeah.
agree with you, but unfortunately what happens, this is all beautiful discussion, and I completely agree with you, but unfortunately, when you are blocked, sometimes the process of clearing is extremely painful and extremely painful. And what also plays into here is the law of past karma that we bring. Because, you know, the deeper I get into Pathworks, and I'm very grateful for it because the growth is there, the more I see that I create myself very painful experiences to bring from subconscious to the very consciousness some of my blockages, impediments, attitudes, like, you know, deprived self-will and fear. And then when they hit the surface and you face with, like, you know, day-to-day reality of them really surfacing, and you have to humble yourself and really live through it, it can be extremely painful. I mean, it is like excruciating pain. And, you know, I don't want to bring too many situations, but, you know, it could be situation at work, could be situation at private life, when you basically hitting, you know, those blocks. You're hitting those blocks, you're bringing them out, because most of the time what we do, we run away from it. You know, before I got on Pathwork and self-development work, I had them, I felt them, but I always was escape, you know, into something. And I think a majority of the people outside of those few who really work on themselves do. So you feel something coming up, you feel some pain or dysfunction or blockage or emotional blockage, and you escape, you know, friends, TV, food, sex, shopping, entertainment, whatever the hell you can do, you get the hell out of there. Now, when you get on a spiritual path, I think your higher self literally piles up events and brings about stuff that literally hit the block with a pretty high force. And yeah, it brings them to consciousness, but also it can be an extremely excruciatingly painful experience. What I learned from Pathwork is not to run away from that pain anymore. Like one was saying, you know, don't run away. That's one thing I learned. I sit with it. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to go to pieces from that pain. You know, like the body is really going to shatter because we are still in this physical form. And what it is, the clearing process, and I'm sure, like Mariana is always saying, hold the hand of God. I had very, very painful last 2 weeks with some very difficult situation. And I was literally praying every day, God, please hold my hand. God, please hold my hand. I cannot go through this alone. Hold my hand. And today the situation dissolved a little bit. Actually, it really turned around. But I think that was because I stayed with that extreme pain. I looked at it, I felt it, I didn't push it away. But that's why I think majority of the people run away from that work, because this is extremely painful. And the funny thing is, I cannot recall, yeah, I had trauma in this life, and I know the trauma, you know, needs to clear, and there's triggers, and it's connected to emotional blockages that I brought from past lives, but I don't have any particular memories of doing something to deserve that kind of pain in this life. You know, like I haven't really broken those laws that I can remember in this life. A lot of that stuff we carry with us into the current incarnation, you know, and when it hits the block, all of that pent up stuff, I think from maybe incarnations ago, basically gets, you know, unraveled, gets resurfaces, you know, basically comes up for healing. And it's a good thing that it comes up because it needs to come up to heal, but the process is excruciating pain. And, you know, teaches you humility, which I think is the main value that it came to teach me. But still, to the ego, it feels like it's dying. To the body, it feels like it's shattered. To your old way of life, it feels like you're threatened. And this cleansing process can be extremely painful. So, you know, I value this lesson for those insights because, yes, at least one thing you know is not a senseless suffering, you know. It is an intelligent universe that loves you. And probably I brought it upon myself because I think at certain point, your soul grows enough to say, okay, you're ready for this. Let's clear this shit, you're ready. But then
Right.
when it hits, you're like, oh my God, I wish I didn't. Oh my God, I wish I didn't. It's just like, somebody rips the carpet from under you and you literally hit the pavement, and split your head up for bleeding. So yeah, it's a very valuable lesson because in my case, what it tells me, it's not random. It's not revengeful. I brought it upon myself. I have to take responsibility for it and I have to dig deep where it's coming from. But at the same time, the biggest challenge is to sit with it. Don't go around it, don't escape. Don't start doing everything to, you know, to avoid it. Just sit with it and feel it. And it's very, very hard. It's really, sometimes it's excruciating pain.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we create crisis for spiritual growth, right? That's what that famous
That's what I'm thinking.
yes, that's what
That's what I'm
going on.
thinking. That
Either
probably but still it doesn't help the fact that you really suffer so much and you have to endure that pain. And I said, okay, I'm not going to avoid it. I'm going to go through it. If it burns me to death, I'm going through it. I'm going through it. I'm going through it. But just God, hold my hands. And thank God Marianne always says, I'm like, I can't do it alone. Hold my hand, hold my hand. And, and I feel like I'm coming out on the other side, but it's been 2 weeks of pure murder and pain and suffering and like uncertainty and literally like, why do I deserve this? But then I have to say, yeah, I created it on some level somehow because it's here. So,
Right.
but I don't remember doing anything in this life. So I'm thinking also this goes deeper. This goes to clearing on the soul level. Like when the ladies were discussing the consciousness, yeah, of course it's not the body, of course we are a spirit. Of
Yeah.
course, not only Christ, but all of the, all of the advanced yogis, they have Mahasamadhi. They know exactly when they're going to leave their body and they can even come back and recreate it just like Christ. This is advanced spiritual tools that are available to advanced spiritual seekers and is there, but I'm not there yet. I'm still here with that immense suffering saying, Jesus Christ, the Lord, how did I even deserve it? And then saying, okay, I take responsibility and I'm going through it, but God, hold my hand because it's so hard.
Teresa, I completely identify with what you're going through. I also have been going through a lot of physical pain and of course emotional pain and psychological pain. But you know what you said that I really, really appreciate? The pain is deadly, almost deadly, but there's a purpose. Isn't that nice? Nice is a funny word, but isn't that a good feeling? I'm so happy that you said it, that this is a kind of, it's not just random stupid pain that you take a pill
Yeah,
and then it's gone.
it's got a purpose.
No,
It's got a purpose.
it has depth. It has such gifts, which when you're in the middle of it, you don't want to hear about.
You
But
don't want to know.
no, but I really just congratulations to you for saying that you stuck with it. I just want to pat you on the back. It's
This is
wonderful.
Pathwork, Kate. This is Pathwork because before, trust me, I would do anything to get the hell out of there. I would employ all my tools and toys to get the hell out of there and to reroute it. And I've done it for years, but now, I study Pathwork and I said, no, I want to sit with it. If it kills me, I got to go through it because I don't want to repeat it again. I know on the other side is freedom. And I know that until I really dissolve it, completely dissolve it within myself to the very core, like you were saying about pulling those weeds, he says, pull these weeds. That's what I decided to do. I said, it hit me many times and I did the work to a minimum and I ran away from it and it came back and it came back and it came back. And now it came back much stronger. And I'm like, no, if it kills me this time, I'm sitting with it. I'm sticking with it. I'm going through it. If it burns me to death. That's fine. That's cleansing. So this, I think, is like a purifying pain that if you really let it go to the deepest depth, as painful as it is, it just burns through it and there is freedom and lightness on the other side. And I just pray for that God's hand to go through it because it can be really, like, the emotional pain especially, I feel like a real blockage in my heart that it's like, oh my God, it's there, but I feel it. I don't push it. I sit with it. So that's the pathwork, advantage that I got, that I don't escape anymore. I just stay with it, however long it takes.
Teresa, are you working with someone or are you?
I am, yeah. I actually have a pathwork therapy tomorrow. I am working with someone, and it's very helpful to work with someone. But also, I'm praying for what Marianne is saying, for that God's hand to hold. And you know what? It does work. It does work. The situation is turning around. The outside situation is turning around, which means I must have turned it around on the inside. Because like this guy says, nothing really shows you on the outside. It happens on the inside first. So I decided, if it kills me, I'm sticking with it and let it burn and let it burn and let it really burn through. Because once it does, there's going to be light. There's going to be freedom on the other side. So I'm going through it, as painful as it is.
More power to you.
Yes, yes, you've described lecture 190, through the gateway of experiencing your pain, leisure, true and abiding pleasure. And the guide has brought this out, that we are much more comfortable in being in our pain than our pleasure, but you're in the gateway. I call it, rather than the tunnel of love, I call it the tunnel of pain. You're going through the tunnel of pain, and it has a curve in it, so you can't see around it. So some people say, oh, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. I said, if you got a curve in the tunnel, you don't see any light. But, there's some trust here, and you're grounded in your process, and you're getting help. And you've spoken your truth, and I can feel it, and I appreciate it, because it is your truth, and it's very powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
So, okay, if I build on
Of
Teresa.
course.
And
Go
say a
ahead, Mary
little
Jane.
bit, one of the things, well, this week I was working with this lecture, and I think it was lecture 60, the Abyss of
Illusion.
And yeah,
Yes.
and so these two lectures really reinforced certain concepts. One being that whole, as Teresa was saying, just sitting with it, where you allow yourself to just fall into that abyss until you float to the surface. And I guess that's the miracle I've found of pathwork, is rather than, letting that negative pleasure take hold, I experienced the negative situation, but almost as an observer now. Oh, what's the lesson I'm supposed to learn here today? Almost daily, hourly, when something, when I'm experiencing an ER, it's always, oh, where do I need to learn which lesson and why and how? All of those questions just bubble around. And if I allow myself to really sit and delve into it, there's just such a calming effect, rather than running away and trying to distract myself, just allowing that focus to happen. One of the, I guess, what I really enjoyed about this lecture, many things, but for me, it's always, since I'm a fairly new path worker, it's always easier when there's, and I don't want to say it's easy, none of these concepts are easy, when the guide uses examples that are visual, like the plant, like when we're regeneration and degeneration and, pulling up the poison plant. That was one. Then moving on to needing the surgery, the pain of the ailment versus the severe pain of the injury versus the short-term pain of recovery to get on the other side. So you can really feel that. And
Yeah.
then the last one about the lawyer, so that's I work for a firm that's that we represent defense and insurance. So that was real. That concept was really crystal clear for me to get, that whole put yourself in that other place and I guess as Tracy said, until you believe it. And I guess I just wanted to mention one other, as Marion says, tools. And I don't know, Juan, if you remembered weeks ago when you had mentioned that you were running and you just allowed that pain to happen until it didn't. So I suffer from vertigo. And when I find myself getting nervous, when I feel an attack coming on and I try to do anything to stop it, it almost prolongs it. And if I can get myself to a safe place and just relax into it, it dissipates so much faster. So that's about all I had to say. This was wonderful tonight. This lecture is just so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we have a meditation or do we have any other thoughts? Does anyone want to talk about images? I mean, the guide really asks us to do a lot of hard work on images in this lecture. I mean, when you look at everything in your life and you try to make an inventory of your feelings about the main issues in your life, that's hard work. And in some of this lecture, the guide's almost like talking to helpers and saying, well, how would you introduce somebody to these concepts, or how would you help someone understand their images? Because I think that in these, back in when this lecture was given, there weren't a lot of people on the Pathwork, and I think that they were just starting to form these image finding teams, which is the way the guide first brought forward the concept of helpership, that you get together with somebody and you discover what your images are, you unearth them, you come to terms with them. So the guide is kind of talking to people, pathworkers who are interested in helping others discover their images in this lecture.
I'd love to hear someone talk about it, because I found the tone of this lecture quite difficult. I kept feeling like I was being criticized.
Actually,
and told I'm not,
I'm glad Alan said that, because you know what, Alan, I actually felt like that page 4, the second part of that large paragraph, I felt like it was exactly that the guide was almost giving a training manual to future helpers on that paragraph and the one following.
Right.
Sounds just like what my helper does with me.
I got that feeling from it too. Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
It's not easy. It's not easy to do those things. Right. Well, the guy never said it was going to be easy, right? Yeah.
So Alan, for me, when I read that, I just started laughing, because it was a very global statement. And I shared with Tracy that I think part of that statement was from the perspective of the world of the guide. So almost like the guide is looking down on us and very quickly and briefly summarizing what our task is. And I started laughing when I read it, because it's massive. The idea that I could, I'm not capable of approaching the images from that perspective. I need to start with, I'm going into my lower self, what's happening right now. What am I projecting out onto the world, onto another person, onto the situation? What's coming up for me that I don't like, that I'm separating from my higher self, and then to start digging around. It might take a while, it might take days, what are all the different levels of the image, going back to my earliest memories. Maybe so. I guess an example might help. So we went to an event here, and when I got there, there was a price, and I immediately went into my lower self. I was upset about how much it cost. The price had gone up in the last year, and so I just kept working with it, and there were a lot of levels. About value and about fairness and about I was taught ganoffs are all over the place, thieves are all over the place, and so, but the idea that I'm going to take apart all the images that I have around money and start to dissect that is too overwhelming for me. I need to see the little pings that I feel in the course of a day, and try to focus my attention on one at a time. And if I can make progress with one of the number that may come up in any given day, then I feel I'm making progress.
Well, one can always try to write down and do an exercise writing these things down, pen and ink. That's valuable.
Yes.
And difficult too. The ego's, one resists doing these things.
Yes.
Anyway, but there's lots of ways. Another thing the guide always says is that, you work on these things from several different directions at the same time, right? Right, Marianne? Because sometimes
Yes.
it's intellectual, then it's emotional. Sometimes life throws you a curveball, you respond to that. When something is too difficult for the ego, maybe the greater self rises up and creates a transformation. It's like it almost.
Yes. And whatever we can do, because everybody is so different. So sometimes I'm not quite sure what I need in the moment, but I did get some guidance a few years ago that I needed to have more fun, because I tend to get heavy and work real hard. And I'm the original hardworking Midwestern girl. And that's been a theme of my life. And so when I got this message, I need to have more fun, I thought, well, I know things I like to do. This before COVID. I like to go to the museum. I like to do certain things, but none of it sounded like fun. Fun had a lightness of being about it. So I asked a question, knowing that powerful questions invite powerful answers. And I need to stop figuring it out, trying to figure it out. So I asked, what's fun for me now? And I let it go, put a period after it, let it go. And when I try to figure it out, I go to, do something else. And then I had an experience. I didn't know it was going to be so much fun. I'm not going to go into that, but I had something came up in my life that was so much fun, and it was fun connected to the heart. It was so beautiful. So I always say, powerful questions bring powerful answers. I don't have to figure everything out. And I constantly have to remind myself of that, because my image is I've got to do everything.
Well, what was it?
I had to work hard.
What was the fun thing?
Well, this was a few years ago. It happened to be that my oldest grandson, who was still in high school, he's now in college, who was moving away from me. I hardly saw him anymore because he had his own life, and I helped raise this kid. And I didn't think about him. There was something happening at the church I was involved with, an evening talk about a book, and I thought he'd be interested. And never before had I ever sent an email, would you might be interested in going. I wasn't going to go. I thought he might. I'd never done that before because I don't intrude on his life. I got an email back. Oh, yes, I'd like to. Would you go with me? I said, okay. So I went, and these were people I knew, and whatever. I had sort of a nice enough evening, and he had a nice enough evening. And when we walked home in the rain, we had such a personal, connected conversation because I walked home with him afterwards. And then when I got home, I came in and I sat down on the edge of my bed, and I sat up with the straw. I said, oh, I had fun. While I was having fun, I wasn't thinking I'm having fun. I entered into the moment, into an experience I'd not had before. very higher self-guided. And it was only a few weeks later that that grandson, who is a reason type, so he doesn't come up with his emotions, he said to me, I loved going with you, Grandma, to that event. What was most touching for me was walking home together in the rain and what we talked about.
Yeah.
And then he said, I went right into my room when I got home. I thought it's because he's a reason type. He goes in and shuts his door, you know, and I said goodnight to my daughter and all. And instead he said, I went right into my bedroom to write down what we talked about.
Mm.
I didn't know all that was happening, but when I didn't know all that was happening till later. But when I got home and I sat down, I had fun. I felt through my whole body, my whole energy body was filled with light. So I say powerful questions bring powerful answers. So, and about have some fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Better than I could have ever thought up, I have to tell you. Yeah.
Anyone
I
else?
have to,
Go
I
ahead.
have to leave. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to leave. I'm having a little difficulty that I have to take care of.
Will you meditate with us? Or
A few minutes, maybe.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, Kay.
shall we have our
Yeah.
meditation, my friends?
Yes.
Does anyone have a candle?
Let's see, I can.
Oh,
Light a
Mary
candle?
Jane has one.
Okay.
All right. Maybe I'll turn off these lights here.
Hi, Beverly.
All right. Tracy. Candle here too. All right, my friends, shall we meditate for 10 minutes? How's that sound? Or shall we make it 15?
I can't stay 15.
All right, 10 minutes. All right. Let's meditate on the different ways we each have to contact our higher selves and to come into the place of unity. And our loving connection, our being together is so much a part of that, right? I love that story you just told, Marianne. It says so much. All right, so let's meditate for 10 minutes.